If this movie starts playing, you have to stay until the end by WorldAwayTweedy. I'm not a movie buff, but my friend Kelsey is. Through the many years I've known her, she's exposed me to a whole host of films I never would have dreamed of watching if it weren't for her influence. Niche horror flicks, campy action movies, psychological thrillers imported from Germany, you get the idea. Most of the time, they were pretty great. Often they were strange. And occasionally, they were just bad. But I love Kelsey, and she loves having someone to watch her weird movies with, so I figured it was the least I could do for my oldest friend. Recently, Kels has been in a pretty dark place. Her dad is in hospice care after a long battle with cancer, and so she's been spending most of her time with her immediate family. She'll occasionally shoot me the odd text asking to set up plans, but it's been hard for her to put aside time given everything that's going on. That was until recently I got a text from her for something that I knew she'd commit to. There was a movie coming out that was doing a really short theatrical run, and she wanted to catch it before it was pulled from the big screen. The movie in question wasn't playing in any of our popular local theaters, so we had to do a little research to find the closest indie theater near us. We found one that was about a 40-minute drive from us, called the Daydream Theater. I looked up the venue prior to the event. It had no ratings. Kind of weird, and yet, this place definitely seemed par for the course with the types of hipstery locations Kelsey liked going to, so I didn't overthink it. She picked me up from my house, and drove us both to the theater. After a moderately awkward and quiet evening drive, we arrived. The theater looked old and run down. It was situated in the part of town you'd usually avoid at night. We went in, and to both of our surprises, there was actually a small crowd of roughly 20 other people standing around the lobby and lining up for the movie, likely due to the movie's limited theater run. Kelsey and I scanned the inside of the theater as we walked to the ticket booth. Adorned on the walls were posters of movies I'd never heard of before. Kels, who was understandably a bit low energy, was slowly starting to light up as she took in the character and flavor of this establishment. A haggard-looking older man was helming the ticket desk. His vibe was a mix of disinterest with a dash of seen some shit. I could pick up on it immediately. Almost felt like he was running a business that he was hoping would fail. He had the small group that had come in for the showing. Bit of a crowd, he said, to no one really, his eyebrows slightly raised. He charged us for the tickets. He then mumbled the following: "This theater's got a bit of a legacy that's out of my hands. Pretty likely your movie will play, but a small chance it won't. No refunds." Kelsey and I were already well on our way to the auditorium when he muttered that. Any part of me that wanted to ask the old man for clarification was quelled by Kels's excitement of just being there. As we made our way, I could hear the man repeating the same mumbled line to the others who were buying their tickets: likely your movie will play, but a small chance it won't. No refunds. We entered the dark room and found some perfect seats right in the middle of the auditorium. No drinks or popcorn. It was always serious business when watching movies with Kelsey. Slowly, others spilled into the room and settled into their seats as well. I noticed the gaunt-looking man who was working the booth slowly walk in and take a seat at the very front. "I've been wanting to see this for a while," whispered Kels, excitedly. It warmed me to see her happy. The quiet whispers amongst the various groups in the theater dwindled down as the pre-movie announcements started rolling. The instrumentals of Let's All Go to the Lobby played over a basic presentation that a graphic designer could have mocked up in an afternoon. Please remember to identify the exits in case of emergency or audience participation. Keep talking to a minimum. Cell phones are optional. Goddamn, this theater's got it all. Posters of movies no one has ever seen and ironic pre-movie PSAs. Thanks for coming. And just like that, the movie started. Old-timey music filled the room. On the screen was a credits list of the main cast of the movie. I didn't recognize a single name. Kels turned to me with a raised eyebrow. Next on the screen was the title card of the movie, overlaid on a black and white image of a detective's office. The title of the movie was 2 quotation marks. Seriously. The title was 2 quotation marks with a big empty space in between. No actual name. The old world orchestral sound continued. Then, the image of 2 men sitting across from each other at a diner. Everything looked and sounded dated. The score, the filming style, the actual set, the way the characters were dressed, and heck, even just the way they looked. Having it all in black and white didn't help either. If it was an authentic attempt to pay homage to the movies of the 40s and 50s, it was damn convincing. From my very limited knowledge of cinema, it looked like something that would have come out around the time of Casablanca or It's a Wonderful Life. Just as we were all taking in the scene, the haggard ticket counter guy sitting in the front got up, turned around, and looked back at everyone else in the small crowd. Alright, looks like it's playing something else. If this film ain't your speed, I strongly suggest you pack up and leave. You've got 2 minutes. Everyone looked at each other confusedly. I whispered to Kelsey. This isn't your movie, right? No, Colin Farrell's supposed to be in this, she said back. From the crowd of roughly 20 in attendance, I saw a couple of people slowly get up and leave. Some were muttering and complaining to themselves about the bait and switch. One was spiteful enough to go up to the old man to mutter a few unkind words. The old man was unfazed. I turned to Kels. You want to stay, still? Kels shrugged. Could be interesting. Anything for my girl, I thought. I turned my focus back to the film. On screen, it was still just the 2 fellas in the diner, sipping coffee from their mugs and taking slow drags of their cigarettes. The old man at the front of the theater spoke again. You've got 30 seconds. I mean it, if this ain't your speed, you leave now. I'm dead serious. Kels and I looked at each other with a slight giggle. It felt like we were both telepathically sharing the same thought. Some theaters take this stuff way too seriously. The seconds passed. No one else left. Alright, you're here for the long haul now, the old man continued. There's only one rule for the evening, you can't leave until the credits roll. Take that rule seriously. Enjoy the film. I could hear a few people snicker in the audience. The man turned and gave everyone a look, shook his head to himself, and then turned back to watch the movie. As I'd suspected, the movie was definitely from the 40s or 50s. The way the characters conducted themselves, their mannerisms, their communication styles, all of it was reflective of a bygone era. It took me a bit to hammer down what the genre was, but slowly it became clear. This was a detective story. The conversation between the 2 men at the diner started to get a bit interesting. So the killer's still on the loose, huh, said the first detective. That's no good. His partner in crime, sitting across from him, snickered. Ha! No good. That's one way to put it. Terrible. Dreadful. That's how I'd put it. The two men shared a look. It felt like they'd been doing this for a long time. The movie continued. I was trying my best to pay attention, but I was nodding off more than I'd like to admit. Every now and then, I'd look over to see Kelsey transfixed, as the black and white film went through scene after scene of the detectives working side by side to track down a killer who was on the loose. The two partners visited different interesting locations, dusted things off, examined clues, all that good stuff. It was a bit tacky, if I'm being honest. And after 30 minutes of runtime, it didn't feel like anything of real substance had taken place yet. There was some fun banter between the two leads, but otherwise, it felt like the plot was spinning its wheels and not really taking off. Wasn't awful by any means, just kinda meh. It was at this point that I saw a man getting up to leave the theater. I could see that he was trying to do it as subtly as possible, to not incur the wrath of the old man at the front. He sneakily tiptoed down the aisle, turned the corner onto the small ramp leading out of the room, and left. I don't think the old man saw him leave. Hump must have gotten bored with the movie. I feel you, dude, I thought to myself. I turned my attention back to the large screen. The two detectives were seated at their desks in their shared office, looking over some notes. Immediately, they were interrupted by a third man frantically bolting into the room. They found another body, yelled the visitor. The two detectives nodded at each other and made haste, exiting the room with their frantic and panicked colleague. The next scene was the three of them standing in a park, amidst a larger group of civilians and officers. Near them, a thin white sheet draped over a presumably dead body. The onlookers were sharing concerned whispers. The two detectives approached an officer standing next to the crime scene. "What's the story here?" asked the first detective. Mangled beyond recognition. Gentleman was in his 30s. We know nothing else. Body just left here, in the middle of the park, responded the officer. The second detective took a long drag of his cigarette. I suppose time is of the essence. Nice. I thought to myself. Finally, some movement to the story. Something beyond just searching for clues, pondering, or excessively long shots of the two detectives smoking cigarettes. But I'd gotten ahead of myself. The movie very quickly returned to the slow fare I was used to. Again, it wasn't terrible. We started to learn a bit more about the detectives' lives, what their apartments looked like, what they did when they were off duty, more of their idiosyncrasies, etc. We were about an hour into the movie at this point. I whispered to Kels, "Do you know what this movie is?" She shook her head. "No, it's weird. Definitely a lot of world building. I'm curious about what it's building to." I was a bit groggy at this point. I was getting more and more distracted and bored. After a few minutes of zoning out, I noticed, through the darkness, another small group getting up to leave the theater. It was a mom, a dad, and what looked to be their young teenage son. They quickly made their way down the aisles. Kels didn't notice she was still mesmerized by the movie. I, on the other hand, welcomed the distraction. The haggard man noticed the family as they approached the exit. He got up and yelled out to them, "Don't leave. You can't do that. The movie ain't over yet, you gotta stay." Don't. He watched them disappear around the corner and leave the room. His shouting had gotten everyone's attention. He sighed and went back to his seat. He held his head in his hands for a bit. What an odd duck. Kels turned to me again with a grin. This is super serious business, she said through her hushed giggles. I smirked back at her. But I was a bit curious. Why did it feel like there was a genuine hint of panic in the old man's voice? I shook it off. Back to the movie. It was a scene of the lead detective lying in bed, ruminating. Then, an immediate cut to a crime scene. Chalk outlines of 3 bodies on the ground. I swallowed a lump in my throat. Weird timing. But just a crazy coincidence is all. I mean, I was watching a movie about detectives looking for a serial killer for Pete's sake. All of this was par for the course. I turned my brain off and let the movie continue. The men on screen talked. "What's the story?" asked the lead detective. It sounded like this was his catchphrase. An officer at the scene, who looked damn near identical to the cop at the first crime scene, responded, "A wife, a husband, and their young son." "Same killer, you think?" chimed in the second detective. The officer nodded. "Whoever did this, they ravaged him. Tore him apart." The detectives turned to each other. The lead spoke. "We're gonna need to catch this bastard, and soon." The small knot in my stomach tightened. At this point, I felt a very strong urge to leave the theater. But, as the old man had established, walking out before the credits was probably a bad idea. Hopefully it's almost over, I thought to myself. Unfortunately, the unthinkable, by Kels's standards, happened. Kels's phone started ringing. In the middle of the theater. Something that I knew she viewed as a cardinal sin. Her dorky ringtone filled the room. She turned to me. "I told my mom to call in case anything happened with Dad." "Right. Shit. I'd almost forgotten about her dad." She fumbled around in her seat, attempting to pull out her phone. I turned to the movie. The 2 detectives were seated at their desks, looking over their notes, like usual. It was a quiet scene. A boring scene. Then, immediately, the phone at one of the detectives' desks started ringing. Huh. I looked back at Kelsey. She'd finally pulled her phone out of her pocket. Her dorky vintage flip phone with a heart keychain on it. Where can you even buy a flip phone from nowadays? The on-screen action continued. "Who do you think is calling?" asked the main detective. "I don't know, but I have a feeling this is a call of a lifetime," responded his partner. Strange dialogue, I thought to myself. Kels finally answered her phone. I tried not to eavesdrop, but it was pretty hard to ignore the conversation. It sounded like bad news. Her dad's condition was worsening rapidly. This looked like it could be it. She hung up the phone. "I gotta go." It sounded stupid, but I had to say it. "Kels, stay until the end. I think the movie's almost over anyways." Kels was emotional. "Dad's gonna die, and I need to be there with him." "I'm sorry, but I have to run. I'll pay you back for your cab ride home." She got up from her seat and started running out. I was frozen in fear for a moment. "No." I got up from my seat and chased after her. She was at the bottom of the aisles and briskly making her way to the exit. I attempted to close the distance. Kels. Wait, I think there's... She rounded the corner to leave. I was right behind her. Kels. I felt a hand pull me back before I could catch her. It was the old man. He was glaring. Angry. Back to your seat, he said. There was nothing you could do about that one. Understood? I was shocked. But I gathered myself and walked up the stairs to my seat. I could hear him mutter sorry under his breath. I'm just being crazy, I thought to myself. I kept repeating that in my head. I'm being crazy. All of this is fine. I'm overthinking things. Back to watching the film, with my heart thumping like crazy. The detectives had wrapped up their phone call. What was it? Asked the partner. The lead detective responded. They found the killer. He's holed up in an apartment. He's surrounded. But he's got a hostage. A girl. Fuck. The detective continued. It's a rookie crew of officers. They have no idea what to do next. We're gonna need to head there ourselves, to end this madness once for all. Bring your pistol. An immediate cut to the next scene, which showed the main detective kicking down the door to an apartment. He entered the pitch-black room, followed by his partner in crime and a ragtag crew of young officers, all of them with pistols drawn. One of them turned on the lights. Standing in the middle of the room was a tall man with blood smeared all over his face. His hands were already above his head. Plastered on his face was the widest grin I'd ever seen. The officers apprehended him, pinning him down and putting him in cuffs. The villain complied, smiling all the way. Next shot was a close-up. On the hardwood ground beside the apprehended suspect was Kels's vintage flip phone adorned with her heart keychain. I closed my eyes. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I heard the audio of the film. Look at what he's done to her. I squinted. From the little that I saw, her body had been completely torn apart. A mess of what used to be Kelsey in a thick pool of blood. This disgusting monster deserves the death penalty. No two ways about it. They draped a sheet over her. At least the madness is finally over now. I continued squinting through my choking tears and my panic. The end credits of the movie started rolling over a scene of the detectives and officers standing beside the handcuffed criminal and his never-dissipating grin. A hopeful orchestral score played in the background. As the credits of the cast and crew wrapped up, the title of the movie showed up on the screen. There was now something between the quotation marks. Thank you for coming. And it was over. The rest is a blur. I don't remember exactly when I felt comfortable getting up and leaving the theater. I looked for any of the other attendees. They'd all left at this point. No one was manning the ticket booth. The old man was gone. I went to the table and saw a note he'd left on it. I don't have any power in this. I'm sorry. I had to call a cab home. I took a bath as soon as I got to my apartment. Took me a few hours before I had the guts to call Kelsey. I prayed and prayed that she'd answer, and that everything I saw was just a fucked up hallucination. Every call went straight to voicemail. Over and over. I tried not to think about the fact that her voicemail was just the instrumentals to "Let's all go to the lobby." This couldn't be real. It was just a sick prank. It had to be. I called her mom. She answered immediately. I asked her if Kels was able to catch her dad in time. Her dad was still here. His condition was the same, he was still on death's door and in hospice care, but there'd been no major changes otherwise since this morning. I asked if she had called Kels at any point today, but she said they hadn't. Everyone's looking for her now. I don't have the heart to tell them that I don't think they'll find her. I'm not a movie buff. But for my best friend, I'm gonna figure out everything I can about this film. The cast, the crew, any other theaters it might be playing at, and how to make sure it never tampers with anyone's life ever again. I've visited the Daydream Theater every day for the last week. It's been closed. No showings whatsoever. But I'll be there when it opens again. Guarding the aisles, telling everyone to ignore the pre-movie PSA. Cell phones off. And no one's leaving until the credits roll. The end. Next story. I finally decided to get into speedrunning. The game I'm playing isn't very happy about it. I love speedrunning. I always have. Now, have I actually taken the time to try a proper run of one of my favorite games? Nope. But as a watcher, I've been fantastic. I religiously tune into games done quick, both summer and awesome, have been following the progression of the Super Mario 64 120-star world record for many years now. Cheese is the absolute GOAT, and have absolutely fallen in love with Atriox's progressively insane ways of breaking the Hitman trilogy. Speedrunning, for the few uninitiated who are reading this, is the act of playing a video game, or section of a video game, with the goal of completing it as fast as possible. Thank you, Wikipedia. Or, as Urban Dictionary puts it, game go burr. Both definitions probably suffice. Really, the best way I can describe it is a love letter. You know a community truly loves a game when they spend hours upon hours discovering all of the secrets and glitches that a game has to offer, in pursuit of beating it in record time. It's beautiful stuff. So after years of being on the outside looking in, I figured why not give it a good old college try. Maybe the thousands of hours I've spent digesting speedrunning content might actually give me a leg up. What do I have to lose? Ha! The game I chose as my poison was a relatively unknown PS2 game. It was a turn-based JRPG with the setting, style, and mechanics of a traditional Final Fantasy game, taking place in a magical kingdom filled with the usual fare of mages, knights, emotionally confused protagonists, and over-the-top villains. It had the modern sheen of a Persona game, the quirkiness you'd find in something like Earthbound or Undertale, and a soundtrack to die for. It was definitely way ahead of its time, and I still consider it to be one of the greatest hidden gems in gaming. And since it was a pretty niche game, I figured it'd be quite easy for me to climb the speedrunner rankings with ease. It was one of very few games I owned growing up, so it almost felt like I was entering the fray with a bit of an advantage. After a little bit of searching around my garage, I was able to find the game disc that my parents first purchased for me from the flea market back in 2003. I popped the disc into my miraculously still functional PlayStation 2, and I started my trip down memory lane. At first, to properly orient myself as a true runner of the game, I went back and watched all of the speedruns of the game that I could find. Given its niche nature, it proved pretty tricky to find full runs of the game, but eventually I was able to chase down a few long-form speedrun playthroughs that had been uploaded to YouTube by some of the game's previous world record holders. I also found some guides pertaining to specific tricks and time saves for different sections of the game at speedrun.com. I knew it would be a bit of a commitment, but I was excited to get started. My first few weeks speedrunning the game were pretty basic. I held myself to finishing a run every week, even if my time was terrible. Likewise, I started practicing a bunch of early and late-stage game tricks by utilizing multiple save files. It was a long game, filled to the brim with character conversations, side quests, lengthy and strategic turn-based boss battles, and cinematic cutscenes, so progress was slow. That said, as I started conquering trick after trick, it felt like I was gaining some momentum. As I plowed ahead, my mostly enjoyable experience learning how to break this game was interrupted by something I didn't anticipate. I wasn't sure exactly when it started, but at random points in the game, it felt like more and more dialogue boxes were coming up during character conversations. Generally, in a speedrun, you're clicking through all of the dialogue boxes as fast and frequently as possible. After all, the point isn't to experience the narrative and character conversations in full, the point is to power through the game in record time. The additional dialogue boxes were especially apparent during a major boss fight that took place at the midpoint of the game. I noticed that the dialogue, both before and even during the battle, seemed to run much longer than what I initially remembered from all of my playthroughs of the game growing up. In fact, the length of these conversations seemed to vary between each single run I was doing. Some backstory on this fight: it's a major story beat, where a powerful female magician and arch-rival to your group has her first real showdown with the team. The group, or party, led by our fateful protagonist and reformed thief, we can call him Knight, loses this epic encounter every single run. It's known as a scripted battle. No matter how well you fight, the boss battle always ends with the female magician casting an overpowered fire spell to knock out your entire party. After the fight, an epic cinematic would play, where the true final villain of the game would make their first appearance. After a few times of reaching this boss battle during my speedruns, curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to ditch my speedrunning focus momentarily to actually catch what the additional dialogue boxes were saying. I'll try to recall them below to the best of my ability. Magician, this again? Knight, I'm sorry. I'm hoping this will stop soon. I am not in control. Magician, is the one controlling you aware that we are the originals? A promise was made that our world would be left alone after our story was experienced. Knight, we've been trying to communicate with the one controlling us. We've had no luck thus far. Weird. I let the boss battle play out as normal, and then I went to bed early. It was a bit of an uncomfortable experience to see a dialogue exchange that I couldn't recall from previous playthroughs, from a game that I thought I knew inside out, but I was able to shake it off pretty quickly. The now defunct developers were known for throwing meta stuff into their games from time to time. Another series they'd helmed for the original PlayStation was actually quite famous for its meta-narratives. And so, I decided to soothe myself with the most reasonable explanation I could think of. Clearly, through my speedrunning and experimenting, I'd accidentally triggered a hidden story route that was put into the game by the devs that had remained undiscovered until now. I'll be honest and say that I didn't buy this idea completely, but it was enough for me to get a good night's sleep and not think about it too much. And what the hell? Maybe I could see how this weird new story route played out during future run-throughs, in case it was something I could take advantage of to find a more optimized speedrunning route. Over the next couple of days, I did my best to ignore all of the dialogue boxes, especially any that looked like they were new additions that hadn't been there before. There were a couple of odd moments that happened during this period. Sometimes, the party would take a while to respond to action commands during battle: X attack, defend, use item, flee, etc. I'd have to press the button multiple times for them to take any sort of action. Other times, specifically during cutscenes and cinematics, it sort of felt like there were more characters in the background than usual. Most of the time, they were just sort of there, lingering in the back, taking in the action, looking a bit out of place. And finally, weirdest of all, it sometimes felt like the 3D models of the main party looked kind of, for lack of a better term, worn out. They didn't look as peppy as fantasy characters usually looked. I convinced myself that my eyes were just playing tricks on me. After all, speedrunning is the art of staring at a screen for many hours at a time doing the same thing over and over again. Maybe weird moments like these were just me playing mental tricks on myself. A few months ago, I had an extra amount of spare time after work, so I booted up the game and started playing. For some reason, this time I had an immediate feeling of dread as soon as I did. I tried to shake it, but as I went from the main menu screen to the file select menu, the name of my save file had changed. It now read, "Hello." Huh. Okay. After a slight shock reaction, I grounded myself back in reality. If I had really unlocked some weird hidden story route that the devs had programmed into this game, stuff like this was probably going to continue to happen, as weird or unsettling as it might have been to me. I kept my cool. I loaded the save file. The save file was supposed to load up in an expansive kingdom area where I was in the midst of practicing a pretty complicated late-game trick. Instead, it loaded on our knight protagonist standing in a weird dungeon-like room I'd never ever seen before. As I went to control the knight, he started walking on his own. Shit startled the hell out of me. I checked to see if I'd accidentally set my controller down on the sofa, causing the analog stick to be stuck in some random position, but nope. I even unplugged the controller just to be safe. It didn't change anything. I watched, nervous and confused, as the knight walked through dark hallway after dark hallway. This went on for minutes. Eventually, he reached a long, dimly lit room where the other three main characters in the party were seated on different sides of a very long table. All of the party members were facing the screen. It felt uncomfortable. A dialogue box showed up next to Knight. It just said W. It looked like the rest was loading. I sat there a good while waiting for the rest of the dialogue to come up, but nothing happened. I plugged in my controller again and pressed X to see if that would do anything. Slowly, letter by letter, the message came through. "Knight, we are hurting, please stop." Once Knight finished the message, he collapsed to the ground. He slowly crawled over to a chair and took a seat. Immediately after, a dialogue box came up next to another one of our main party members. Let's call her Princess for the sake of simplicity. She stood up from her chair, as I clicked, letter by letter, unveiling her dialogue. "Princess, these are our lives, this is our world." As she finished her message, Princess fell back onto her chair, as if she'd fallen to the same exhaustion that had just hit Knight. Next, it was the powerful black mage of the party who stood up. "Mage, delete the file, please." The mage collapsed onto his chair. It looked like communicating directly with me was incredibly taxing for these characters for some reason. Nice work, devs. If you were trying to freak me out, you nailed it. The fourth member of the party, a powerful barbarian, closed it out. "Barbarian, we will take you there now." An immediate cut to a black screen. And then, the main menu? Jesus. I was frozen for a few minutes. The iconic main theme music, ironically named A Beautiful Return in the official game OST, was playing in the background, but rather than feeling the usual nostalgia, comfort, and excitement I felt when starting up the game, I instead had this weird skin-curdling feeling. There's always a healthy level of detachment you feel with all video games, regardless of how engrossing they are. This game felt like it was encroaching on my real life. I shook it off. Don't be crazy. It's a fucking video game. Old games still have Easter eggs and hidden secrets that are being discovered to this day. This was just undiscovered content. It comes with the territory of speedrunning. I just needed to take a break. I went to the load game menu to delete my save. I did what I knew I had to do for my sanity. Delete save file? I confirmed. But the file didn't delete. Instead, another pop-up came up. Never return here? What the fuck? I confirmed. Fuck, what? What the fuck was that? I immediately started self-soothing myself again. I was just seeing things. This was nothing. The devs just went too far. Everything was fine. I fought the urge to throw my controller across the room. I took a deep breath and looked back up at the screen. The file had been deleted. Wonderful. I turned off the game. A few days passed. I wondered if I should get a new copy of the game, or maybe try speedrunning a new version of it on the PC or something. I was curious to see if I could replicate some of the weird happenings that were occurring on my PS2 copy. Or, maybe I could load a new file, forget about everything that just happened, and just play the game like normal. It took a little bit, but eventually, I turned on the PS2 again, popped in the game disc, and started playing again. This time, I wasn't here to speedrun. I just wanted to see what the game would be like this time. Would it continue with the weird meta-story I'd uncovered? Or would it default to the exciting adventure I knew and loved? I needed to do my research. I booted up the game, clicked New Game and jumped back into it. For the first good while, the game was completely back to normal. Same opening cinematic, same opening sequences and battles, and dialogue that I actually remembered. Fuck, that's relieving. Whatever happened before was just a weird glitchy Easter egg that I triggered through some accidental speedrunning strat I'd discovered. Thank God. It was cathartic to go through the game as intended. To just enjoy the adventure as it had initially been designed. It felt like everything was back to normal. That is, until I got 2/3 through the game's story. I was in an expansive village area, taking our knight protagonist through a fun little side quest. A random NPC came up to him. NPC, is that devil controlling you? Knight, I believe it is. It was gone for some time, though. I hope this is temporary. The NPC turned away from Knight. It was hard to tell, but it almost looked like it was looking at the screen. Or trying to. NPC, we deny you. Okay. Maybe some remnants of that hidden story route were still lingering. I didn't need to think about how video games work. I just needed to ignore it and keep playing. Happenings like this continued as I forged through random side quests. The dialogue would run like normal, but then randomly, NPCs would interject with "Is that devil still controlling you?" or some variation of that question. Sometimes Knight would respond, other times he'd shrug. Sometimes, he'd just respond with dots. The next week of playing had more of the same happenings, but everything else ran smoothly enough that I figured I could maybe retry speedrunning the game now to see if I could get a good time. Just one good run, I thought to myself, and then I could be done with it. I sincerely hoped that any new strange happenings would be limited to NPC dialogue. Unfortunately, other bizarre occurrences started to take place again. Sometimes, mid-battle, the other party members would randomly select healing items or healing spells and cast them on the knight, even when he was at full health, as if he had some sort of invisible ailment that just wouldn't go away. Other times, the other party members would split off from Knight at random points in the game. They would play it off like it was a part of the story, but it would never make any sense. Princess, Mage, and the Barbarian would make up some half-baked excuse and just walk off. Half the time it would kick off with the princess saying it looks like we need to return to the kingdom to help the baron, and then off they'd go. It would usually happen in towns, which was fine as I always had some other story points I could knock out with night, but it started getting unsettling once I noticed that most of the time, they were still in the town, just huddled in a random corner, almost as if they were discussing something together. If I ever went to approach them, Night would usually stop me and say something like I don't think there's anything there for me, and would then course correct back to the main quest. At this point, I had a few things happening in my favor, and a few things working against me. The good? I was mighty experienced with the game. More than ever. I knew a good chunk of the speedrunning strats and could perform them comfortably. Also, it looked like random chunks of the game were getting completely skipped at this point. Towns, boss battles, and long cutscenes would disappear seemingly at random. The bad? The team was starting to look real tattered. No matter how much I leveled them up and grinded, their HP and strength was quite low. Moreover, having NPCs and bosses discussing the devil or the matter through additional dialogue boxes was taking up a lot of time. For every strat or corner I was able to cut to optimize my speedrun, the additional happenings would offset it. Even just traversing the world map was starting to take a lot of time. It almost felt like Night and the team were walking slower. As I continued my runs, I hit a left turn I wasn't expecting. This happened about a month ago. It was one of the strangest things I'd ever seen programmed into a game before. I was back at the midpoint boss battle with the powerful female magician. The whole party was low health. The actual 3D models of the party looked miserable, hunched over, meek, depressed. The magician looked equally miserable. She had numerous dialogue boxes show up in the battle. Magician, I will not be reborn again. The fight continued as the party chipped away at the boss battle. It would sometimes take them a full minute to register a fight command I put in. Magician, I understand you have to proceed, or else the devil will hurt you instead. The fight continued. I knew she was down to low HP. I knew the fight was almost over. Magician, I bid you farewell, friends. And then the strangest thing happened. I mentioned this earlier, this is a scripted fight. The magician would use a powerful fire spell, and the whole team would automatically be defeated in battle. The fight would end, and the midpoint section of the game would cap off with an epic in-game cinematic. Instead, the magician just collapsed. Awkwardly. Contorted. Face in the ground. Weird pixelated looking blood pouring from her. The victory theme played. The party didn't celebrate. They held their heads down sadly. After an awkwardly long victory theme, the game cut away to the cinematic following the battle. Usually, this cinematic would showcase the party defeated and groveling on the floor, as the female magician would walk off. At this point, the main antagonist of the game, a powerful wizard, would show up, and almost tauntingly, cast a healing spell on the group, before snickering and disappearing into the shadows. This time, in what I shit you not was a fully rendered 3D cut scene, the scene started with the magician still dead on the ground, with the party hanging their heads solemnly. The main villain showed up, but this time, he completely ignored the party, and instead walked closer and closer towards the screen. Step after step. By the time he stopped, his face was fully filling up the screen. He was staring straight ahead. 4 minutes. Glaring. Completely uninterrupted. Just the sound of rain in the background, and the party continuing to stand in sadness. It was fucking eerie. Then, a quick flicker, and a cutaway to a black screen. Then, back to completely unrelated gameplay, as if the cinematic never happened. fucking hell? I needed to quit playing this game immediately. Restarting it was a fucking mistake. I finally did the thing I should have done this whole time. I turned off my PS2 and went on with my life. And things were fine. Normal even. Maybe I can speedrun something else. Here's hoping that the Donkey Kong games aren't fucking cursed, right? Or maybe one of the SNES Final Fantasy games? FFVI was always fun. Time went on. I started thinking about other stuff. Speedrunning became a distant thought in the corner of my mind. That was, until last Wednesday. I'm a pretty light sleeper. It doesn't take a lot to wake me up. I was laying in bed, and suddenly, I jolted awake from a sound. It felt like there was a noise coming from the living room. A song. I tried to listen. Wait. Is that the fucking final boss music? I stumbled into my living room to see the light from the TV illuminating the dark room. I was correct. The final boss theme from the game was playing. The game was running, and the party was in battle. They looked tattered. And awful. How the fuck did the game start? Who the fuck were they fighting? I took a closer look. So, usually in JRPGs battles, the enemy is on one side of the screen, and your party is on the other. Think of the Pokemon video games, Dragon Quest, Final Fantasy, etc. It can sometimes be a diagonal setup, and other times, a setup where the enemy is facing the screen and you, as the player, can see the backs of your party members. This time, the party of Knight, Princess, Mage, and Barbarian were on the enemy side of the screen. And there was no party they were doing battle with. They were casting fire spells, status spells, and doing physical sword attacks on what looked to be thin air. I watched for a moment, confused. Then it hit me. They were facing the screen. Or at least trying to. They were trying to attack me. A few of the attacks looked to hit the screen directly, while others were diagonal or slightly missed the mark. But the intention was clear. This felt unnerving. Invasive. Like there was an intruder. But I kept watching. And they kept going and going. Eventually, I was able to muster up the courage to turn off the PS2. Go to bed. You can think about this in the morning, I thought to myself. Of course, I didn't get any sleep. And, well, the next few days were a shit show. I would wake up with random deep gashes on my chest and on my arms. Those made for some awkward hospital visits. How the fuck do you answer the question, what happened to you? I had to make excuses for where I got all of my injuries from. Worse, I woke up to the smoke alarm going off in the middle of the night. I ran and discovered a small fire in a random room of my house. No apparent cause. I was lucky enough to put it out in time before the whole place caught fire. This happened every fucking night. I felt unbelievably sick all last week. Queasy. I was throwing up randomly and coughing up blood. Even my general luck felt impacted. I've never been in any accidents before, but I narrowly avoided death in 2 car accidents over the span of the week. Crazy. But I was still here. And if this happening was real, I needed it to stop. I thought about smashing the disc. But instead, I booted it up. If there was a way to speak with the party, any way at all, I needed to find it. I needed to communicate with them. I needed them to know that I wouldn't play their game anymore. I was done. The whole thing was over, and they could leave me alone. The game loaded. We were on the world map. My first goal was to get to a town, any random, peaceful town, where I could buy some time to think. Unfortunately, I kept getting hit by hordes of random encounters on my way there. And these weren't like the usual ones. They were off. We'd keep running into random enemies, and every time, one of two things would happen. Either my party would attack and kill itself to induce a game over, or the enemy would kill itself, causing the battle to end. Whenever my party would kill themselves, I would just restart the game. I think they eventually got the idea that this wasn't going to work. As for when the enemies would kill themselves, they would usually say a line or two before attacking themselves. Usually, the pop-up dialogue box would say something like "I deny you," or "I will go out on my own terms." As they attacked themselves, their death animations were brutal. They felt realistic. They wouldn't disappear when they killed themselves, they would just collapse. As these random encounters happened, I would then never see these enemies again in the game. It was like they were truly disappearing from the game's world. I gave up for the night and returned to it the next day. This was last night. This time, I was hoping, with all of the defeated enemies, that I could finally get to a town, figure out some makeshift way to communicate with the party, and make peace with them. I loaded my save file. There was no title on it. Black screen. It took longer to load than usual. Then, that old dimly lit room with the long table, where the party members first tried to communicate with me slowly. I saw the sight of knight, princess, mage, and barbarian, all hanging from nooses. The chairs kicked out from under them. Their faces looked drained. It lingered on this scene for a moment. Then, black screen. And then, your progress has now been saved. I was back on the world map. No knight to control. Instead, what looked like a really small floating black orb. I could control it. It moved exceptionally quickly on the world map. Every time I tried to go to a new location on the world map, instead of saying the correct name of the town or dungeon, it would instead say "We deny you." Over and over again. On every single location. I reset the game. I was scared. Horrified. But I had to close this out now. Immediately, I was back on the world map. Nothing had changed. Every location still had the title of "We deny you." No random encounters. I nonetheless progressed through the game, location to location, in the order I remembered. I could still collect items, but the party was gone for good. There were no NPCs anywhere. On I went, from set piece to set piece, places where major boss battles and cutscenes used to be. No more. Nothing. Zilch. Completely empty. Like I was playing an incomplete game. The black orb I was controlling had gone through everything, uninterrupted. I was nearly at the end. You can probably imagine my surprise when I made it to the final location, and saw that the final boss was there, ready for that final battle. The powerful wizard, awaiting my arrival. Before I could even prepare myself, the battle started. As his unique boss music played, he started off the fight with an incredibly long monologue. Syllable by syllable, I clicked through it. Frankly, I can't remember any of it. At that point I just wanted to be done with it. Once he finished his monologue, he collapsed to the floor. It took him a bit of time to get back up. But he did. And then the battle continued. I had no moves. There were no action commands, no items I could utilize, nothing. On his side, he cast the strongest spell in the game, again and again. The Great Wave. It wasn't even supposed to be in his moveset. That move belonged to a random secret boss you could uncover after beating the game. But there he was, casting it over and over again. Every time he cast it, he'd fall to the floor, take a moment to recover, and then stand up and attack me again. The spell never did any damage, but he kept trying. To this moment I don't actually know who he was actually casting it on. On and on he went, looking worse and worse as he repeated his casting. Falling to the floor, coughing up pixelated blood, getting back up. On repeat. Finally, after his 9th time casting, he collapsed to the ground. Permanently. In that same strange, twisted, contorted position the mid-boss magician fell in. The victory theme played over his mangled corpse. And the game cut to the final ending cinematic. I knew this cutscene. The music was the same. The environments, the settings, the camera animation, all of it was the same. What was supposed to be a cinematic celebration of all of the characters in the game's world had no people in it anymore. The world was empty. I didn't think about what the potential impact of those powerful spells would be on my life, had the final boss truly been casting them on me. A part of me thinks he was alternating his choice of targets. One spell for me. And one spell for him. Maybe he wanted to put himself out of his misery, but he also wanted to bring about my demise. Who knows? It didn't matter. None of this mattered now. The cinematic ran to its final moment. A zoom out of the game's world, showcasing the large kingdom in the center. I felt a weird sense of balance as I looked over the empty world in this game. Comforting. Nostalgic. I did it. World record. The end. Next story. I am tracking a package I didn't order by CursesAndBoons. I'm a shopaholic. I'll admit it's not the best trait to have, but there are worse addictions. Plus, I don't spend money I don't have, so it doesn't actually harm me in any way. That being the case, I order a lot of stuff online. So when I received the email saying I had a new package, I didn't question it. Black Friday day sales had been happening all throughout the week and I had gone on a bit of a shopping spree. So the email seemed normal. I thought it was the confirmation for a jacket I had ordered. It was so average at first glance you wouldn't even think twice, so I didn't. That was until I received the actual shipping confirmation for the jacket the next day. That puzzled me, so I decided to check the original email a little better and find out exactly what was arriving. The email was from some obscure delivery company I had never heard of, but that wasn't too strange for small local deliveries. From Wellston Deliveries. Subject: Order number 0382 delivery confirmation. Hi Aiden Kim. Your package is out for delivery and will arrive in 3 to 4 business days. You will meet the delivery person at your front door to complete the order. Track your package here, link. If you have any complications, we are happy to help at our 24/7 customer support line. Call us here, phone number. It didn't immediately say what I had ordered, so I opted to check the tracking page to see the shipping history, thinking it could provide me with some more detail. I wonder if that was the point of no return or if my fate was already sealed the moment I received the email. The package had a history. That was for sure. The thing had seemingly been bounced around the country for the last 7 years, making hundreds of stops at random locations. Every point of the journey seemed to be a random house, not a shipping center like I would have thought normal. 7. Veronis Court, 67, 9th Street West, 112, Honeysuckle Road, 3162 Vincent Circle. It had stopped off at hundreds of houses. The most recent stop was in my city, so I decided to look it up. I recognized the general area, but the address didn't ring a bell. I just wanted to see why it would take 5 to 7 business days for an in-city delivery. When I looked up the address, I was proven right. The last stop had only been about an hour drive away from my house. It was a normal-looking townhouse. That area was pretty popular student housing for the local university, and I had driven through the area multiple times, but that wasn't what jumped out to me. There were a couple of local articles detailing a recent tragedy at that exact address. A local undergrad named Sam Kelsey had been found dead in his home. Found was a generous term. Apparently the state of the body was unidentifiable, and they assumed he was the victim due to him living there alone. I was shocked and was really starting to get freaked out at this point, so I went back to the website. I had seen a courier note at all of the addresses but had not read through them due to there being so many. That was when I realized this was not just a sick prank, but something about the package was not normal. Order number 0382 courier note. Sam Kelsey was a loser. He knew everyone called him that, including his parents. If you were to ask him one thing that he had accomplished, he would probably shrug. When he heard the knock at his door, he didn't question the shipment, he thought it was food. When he let it into his house after not seeing a delivery person, he was a loser still. He didn't make it to the living room before his fingers and legs popped off. He tried to scream, but it was useless as his tongue lay detached in his mouth. Even though the blood flowed out of him as every part of his body popped off, Sam couldn't die. He felt himself strewn across the carpet until his brain finally rolled out of his skull. I threw up in the bathroom before resuming with my disgusting fascination. All of the notes were the same, some more detailed, but all equally gruesome and meaty. Order number 0380 at 67 9th Street West to a Michelle Sierra Gavin went into detail about how she could feel the flesh sliding off her bones as she reached out for help alone in her house. Order number 0379 at 3162 Vincent Circle to Diego Silva went into great detail about what he was thinking when all of his skin shrunk around him, squeezing the insides out like an awful tube of toothpaste. The oldest courier note that I could verify was order number 0017 to Alinda Carmichael at 23 Hunter Road. The note made me once again rush to the bathroom to deposit the bile that was in my stomach. The thoughts as she felt her organs push their way out of her mouth, slithering to escape onto her living room floor. After the organs, everything else on the inside followed suit. The note went into great detail about how the process took an excruciating hour and a half. It was the obituary listing her as dead 7 years ago, saying she was a wonderful mother and wife that made me sick. I want to call the police, but I'm scared that they'll arrest me. Who would believe that a random shipping company has been professionally killing people in ways that don't make sense, all while not leaving any evidence? It wouldn't even matter anyway. I'd still die. Only difference would be that I'm remembered for something I didn't do. I did try to cancel the order, reroute the package, but the website didn't even provide options for that. I even tried staying at a hotel, planning on just not being home when the package arrived. When I checked my phone to see where the package was though, my hopes sunk. The shipping address had changed to the hotel room I was currently staying in. I wondered if it changed when I checked my phone or if it had always been tracking me, just as much as I had been tracking it. There was the customer support phone number on the shipping order confirmation email. So I tried my luck at that, hoping I could beg whoever was on the other side of the line to spare my life. The robotic voice that answered after a couple rings only repeated the same message on a loop into my ear. "This line is dead. Sorry for your loss. I've been thinking about my fate as the time approaches. I've been thinking about how we're just meat. I know it might seem obvious to say. Aiden, of course we're meat. But to be consciously aware of this fact is plaguing me. Every other one of the people I read about in those notes, Sam, Michelle, Diego, Linda, every single one of them had to be identified by the viscera that splattered their houses. They were not people in the end, they were the meat they scraped off the walls. When my time comes, I will be another sickening story of meat that the person after me reads when discovering their impending fate. I know it will be awful. There was never anyone before me who passed nicely. I am me, but I am and will be meat. Although, hopefully this story is enough to make me a little more beyond meat. Maybe it will help someone understand what is going on or how to escape, but I doubt it. I won't be opening my door when I hear a knock, but that did not work for anyone before me. The end.